Our old friend Chip Kelly to Ohio State as the offensive coordinator has both good news and not as good news. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. If you have not already, please like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers, join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Lots of things to get to on a busy Friday. Appreciate you all being flexible on the timing of today's episode, which is fortuitous because Chip Kelly is going to be the offensive coordinator at Ohio State. Let's start with the bad news. I like getting that out of the way first, and then the good news. The bad news for Oregon is that this makes Ohio State's staff very strong because Ryan Day is the head honcho over there. He is the El Jefe, as they say. Brian Hartline offensively is a premier recruiter, so Chip Kelly only has to worry about coaching football, which is what he's best at and what he likes the most. Chip Kelly and Ryan Day have a history together because Chip Kelly was the New Hampshire either offensive coordinator or head coach, and Ryan Day was his quarterback. Ryan Day has coached under Chip Kelly before, so they're switching the roles and who's in charge, but the familiarity is there between those two guys, and you bring him onto a team that has already loaded up as the other Big Ten contender for the Ducks going into their new conference next year. And when Bill O'Brien was looking like he'd be the guy to leave for Boston College, the opening in the ACC, I thought, well, hey, that's good, because now who's Ohio State possibly going to find to be their offense coordinator? Oh, they got Chip. Oh, okay, that's a really good hire. It is a really good hire. So that's the bad news is I think it strengthens Ohio State, makes them, as we already expected them to be, a really good team. And Ryan Day, the reason he brought in Bill O'Brien is he wanted a veteran play caller because Ryan Day isn't going to call plays anymore, just like Dan Lanning doesn't call plays. He never has. And when Lanning first got to Oregon, I wanted him to call plays. But he didn't, and he still doesn't, nor is he ever going to, because that's not what Kirby Smart does, which is where he came from, and that's not what a lot of coaches do. With Chip Kelly out at UCLA, the only head coach I know of that calls plays is Lincoln Riley. As I just go up and down the Big Ten, you can't find a head coach that calls plays on either side of the ball. There are too many other responsibilities as a head coach in college football compared to the NFL, where you have probably half the league of head coaches calling plays up there. So that's the bad news for the Ducks. But the good news is this weakens UCLA. Now, is UCLA someone who I saw as a direct competitor with Oregon going into the Big Ten? No, not necessarily. Not the way that USC, I think, is going to be, or that Washington, we know, is capable of being. But when they are at their best, UCLA is capable of doing well. And UCLA specifically, I don't know who they're going to hire, right? My feelings on this might change a little bit, but at least for a year, UCLA, number one, is going to be a game that Oregon will be a fat favorite in down in Brentwood later this year. I mean, that's Oregon's first Big Ten game is at UCLA. That game of the Rose Bowl, that's probably going to be Oregon minus 14.5, maybe even more. I mean, UCLA's roster, they didn't bring in a lot of talent via the portal. They haven't recruited very well. Their head coach leaves. They'll probably have players depart via the transfer portal. I don't know that there's anybody over there Oregon will necessarily be interested in. I haven't done a deep dive on that. If you want me to, I'm happy to. But it's not something that's at the top of my mind, given where UCLA's roster is at after their 8-5 season last year. But for the Bruins, they're going to be a win for Oregon next year. But Los Angeles is a place where if you've got the right head coach in place in the right situation, even at UCLA, you should be able to recruit Southern California fairly well. Chip Kelly never did. And so you could argue, well, having Chip there, it's something that, you can count on, as he's not going to recruit in a huge way. But Oregon was already the premier, or Oregon is, not was, is. Oregon is the premier recruiting team out west. UCLA being weak, at least for a couple of years, only allows Oregon to go and embolden their stranglehold on Southern California to get the best kids. Because the way that it should work, if UCLA has been run correctly, which they have not been from an administrative level, or if they'd hired coaches who, gave a darn about recruiting, which they again have not, USC should be the number one brand down in Southern California. Oregon should probably be 2, and UCLA should be 3. Instead, what you have is Oregon 1, USC 2, and UCLA 3. But if UCLA pushes to be an even further distant third, I think that helps Oregon continue to establish themselves as the destination spot for that Cali flock, for kids to go from Southern California to Oregon. So UCLA is not going to be a problem for a couple of years. That's a major rebuild. Don't know who they're going to hire. Some names to watch for the Bruins. Their former defensive coordinator, D'Anton Lynn, who was hired in the offseason by USC. Alabama offensive coordinator, former Washington offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb could be a target. And I've heard Minnesota's PJ Fleck, according to a couple of national pundits and reporters, he could be a target as well for the Bruins to fill their head coaching vacancy. But they made a mistake here. I mean, the Bruins are just not particularly well run. And again, if they are well run, we've seen them be a top 10, 15 team before. I mean, in 2022, Lanning's first year, Oregon hosted UCLA. That was a top 10 matchup. That was number 10 Oregon, number 9 UCLA. Bruins were 6-0 going into that game, and Oregon was 5-1. So I think that for the Ducks, this is overall good news, because you look at a team that, is out west, and Oregon, as they go into the Big Ten, is just going to further their stranglehold on, we are the premier recruiting team out west, and we're the premier team out west, because UCLA is going to be a mess for several years, and Chip Kelly may not have the ceiling he once did as a head football coach, but at the very least, he gave UCLA a pretty high floor over the last couple of years. They won 8 or more games in each of those seasons. They're not going to do that now. Whoever gets hired there is going to be in for a full rebuild. I don't think it's a very good job compared to what the perception might be. I don't even know what the national perception is in the coaching community, but that is not a great coaching job, and there are a lot of reasons as to why. I talked about that on a bonus episode of Locked On College Football today. You can go check that out if you'd like. Let's go to the mailbag here. YouTube comments, or X, formerly known as Twitter, at @SMcLaughlinCFB or at Locked On Ducks. DMs and mentions wide open. If you want priority access, you can become a Locked On Ducks insider. Link in the description below at subtext wherever you're listening to or watching right now. Question came in from over there. You get priority mailbag access, part of the perks you get for being a paid subscriber. Do you think there will be instant continuity between Evan Stewart and Dylan Gabriel? Also, do you think there's any chance Gabriel starts, but Dante Moore gets good reps and potentially finishes the season as the starter? The only way I see Dante Moore finishing the season as Oregon's starter is if Dylan Gabriel gets hurt. And the nice thing about having Dante Moore there with starting experience, albeit it's comparable to Loki in Avengers Infinity War, when Thanos says, well, if you consider failure experience, I consider experience. That's what Dante Moore has as a starting quarterback. Should, God forbid, Dylan Gabriel get injured, have to miss a game, be out, or whatever, you have a guy who's got some talent, definitely needs work, but has started college football games before, has won college football games before. So that's at least a perk. But barring an injury, I don't see Moore as being ready to take that job from Gabriel. I think this is a very clear succession plan. And I want to talk about this more on Monday, but I don't think that they brought in Dante Moore to give Dylan Gabriel a short leash. I think they brought in Dante Moore to be the starting quarterback in 2025 and to be a solid backup as well. And he's somebody they like for a variety of reasons, but that's certainly one of them. So I don't think that that's going to be something we see play out. I think Gabriel is Oregon's starter. One of the reasons is the reason I think he will mesh very, very well with Oregon's wide receiver transfer from Texas A&M, former 5-star Evan Stewart. First, let's talk about FanDuel, though, because it's Super Bowl time. Happy Super Bowl to everybody who celebrates from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks. I am a chips and guac / salsa, wings, and beer kind of guy, and placing some super bets. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W or 2 or 3, however many you think you can rack up, because not only can you bet who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. New customers join today. You'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Good, saw a little second segment sip. Thank you, as always, by the way, for being patient on today's episode. I had some scheduling conflicts that would have led to me recording last night's show at 12:30 in the morning, and I was tired and yada, yada, yada. Here we are. Thank you so much. Subscribe if you have not already. Evan Stewart and Dillon Gabriel are a great match. When you watch the highlight reel for Evan Stewart and what gets you excited about bringing a guy who was not just a 5-star high school recruit, but grades as a 5-star transfer. And if you look at what makes him such a dynamic athlete, it's his explosiveness and his ability to push the ball down the field. Well, Dillon Gabriel is not a big guy. He doesn't have a huge arm. He's not an NFL caliber quarterback the way that Bo Nix is, but he is someone who is not afraid to throw the ball down the field, who wants to take some shots. And I think that their chemistry, Gabriel and Stewart's, will be pretty seamless. And I think that he had a guy in Drake Stoops at Oklahoma who was their leading receiver last year. I think Tez Johnson fits that role even better because I think he's a better version of Drake Stoops. But a slot guy, underneath, reliable, great route runner, yards after the catch, that's going to be a really good fit. But on the outside, the guy who Gabriel will push the ball downfield to, I think primarily will be Evan Stewart. Now, we've seen Trayshawn Holden prove himself capable of that as well. And I think he'll probably be Oregon's third leading receiver next year. But I look at that Evan Stewart combination and think that their skill sets and what they do well is really good. It's a really, really good fit. So I don't think there will be any hiccups there between Gabriel and Stewart. I think that it is going to be a really, really seamless transition. Another question here, this one from Lizel Shepard. Does Oregon have to win a natty in the next 3 years in order to maintain getting high-level recruits? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Oregon hasn't been to the playoff since 2014. I expect them to make the playoff in 2024, or the season would be a massive disappointment. But Oregon just pulled in their highest rated recruiting class ever, third best in the country behind only Georgia and Alabama. And guess what? They haven't been in the national championship game in 9 years. So it's about more than just producing results on the field. Now, if Oregon were to reach that level, God willing, in 2024, we'll see maybe 25, 6, I don't know. Just hopefully, well, I'm hosting this show, which I plan to do for a very long time, just so we're all clear. I think that Oregon can get a recruiting bump from winning a national championship, but it's a chicken or the egg problem. Did you win and start recruiting well, or did you recruit well and start winning? Well, yes. That's the answer to that sort of question there. It certainly doesn't hurt, and in fact, it helps when you get that sort of pedigree. I mean, Georgia, 2 national championships in the last 3 years with an Orange Bowl victory, #1 recruiting class. Those two things are correlated. They matter. Georgia also recruited at a very high level before they won national championships. There tends to be a correlation there. Always has been, probably always will be in college football, and you have to factor in the transfer portal, of course, but Oregon can recruit at a top 5 level. Look at Texas A&M. They haven't come as close to playing for a national championship or getting a playoff spot as Oregon has in the last several years, and they pulled in the highest ranked recruiting class ever in the 2022 cycle by anybody at any point in time. So recruiting is multifaceted, and creating interest and having NIL money and having a brand and developing relationships, all those things go into it, and on-field results are a component of it, but they don't make up everything there. Here's something that I've been excited to get into, and I am excited to get into as we move through the offseason here. and that's recruit breakdowns. And kind of looking at Oregon's 2024 class, which is now completely set in stone, and there's nobody else that appears to be lingering out there. Oregon's 2024 high school recruiting class is done. So I got this idea on a live stream with Ryan Winter of Sports Chat 503. Taylor, if you're listening or watching, you know who you are out there, hopped in and had this idea, wanted a comparison of Gatlin Bair and Jeremiah McClellan, who are both highly rated 4-star recruits in the 2024 class for the Ducks. So I'll break those down and kind of explain the differences and then come up with a comparison for each of them so that you have an idea of what Duck this player reminds me of. I'm going to continue doing that for the 2024 class as the offseason rolls along and we move into spring football. So if there's anybody that you want me to break down or a comparison between this guy and that guy, what's the difference? What do you see? What's the timeline? Everything like that, just let me know. Because as always, YouTube comments, X, formerly known as Twitter, or you can become an insider over at Subtext, talk with me one-on-one and ask these sorts of questions and get more detailed thoughts from me delivered right to your phone. So, Jeremiah McClellan, 6 foot, 190 pounds from St. Louis, Missouri, high 4-star recruit, as was Gatlin Bair. I look at 24/7 Sports Composite. 24/7's got Bair as a 5-star, but they're the only service that does, so he's not quite. It's all semantics. It's not changing who the kids are. Aiden Breland lost a star. He's no longer technically a 5-star recruit. So did Mateo Uyunglele. Guess what? He played heavy minutes as a true freshman. That's more of a basketball term. He played heavy snaps as a true freshman. Why? Because he's physically ready to do so. So Jeremiah McClellan was the flip from Ohio State. LSU was also after him. Was a member of the Under Armour All-American game, 6 foot, 190 pounds from St. Louis, Missouri, which is where Dan Lanning is from, roughly that part of the area. He's rooting for the Chiefs on Sunday because he's a big Chiefs fan there. But when I look at McClellan on film, I see a couple of things. Number one, quick acceleration off the ball. He is a good athlete. He also takes the ball at all 3 levels. And so this is a guy who you can work into the screen game, jet sweeps, pop passes. He ran some Wildcat while in high school as well. So he is a true 3-level receiver, but I think he's someone who can be involved in Oregon's screen game going forward offensively. I am a huge fan. Chip Kelly's old mantra was no block, no rock. We'll see if he employs that at Ohio State. I imagine he still does. I like receivers that put blocking sequences on their films, and I just saw this with, in addition to the soft hands that he's got catching the ball down the field, I think that McClellan shows a real physical element to his game. And at 6 foot 190, that's a guy who, physically doesn't need to add a bunch of weight the way that, for instance, Troy Franklin or Dante Thornton really needed to. You could maybe go up to 200, but he looks big. He is built, and I think he's got tremendous potential for the Ducks. And I think that his physicality in both the blocking and his route running and yards after the catch is really good. I think that his biggest area of improvement, and this is something else I want to do with all these recruits that I go in depth on here on the show, he could add more speed, which is something that you can do. You get into a speed program, there's strength and conditioning and nutrition, all that sort of stuff. He runs 11.27 in the 100-meter dash. By comparison, now granted, and 11.27 is not slow per se, but that's not what you'd call a high-end burner. And the 24/7 Sports Scouting Department sees it the same way, that he could add more speed at the top of his routes to be a true downfield sort of threat. But his physicality, his hands, route running, screen passes, I look at him and I see Chase Cota. That's who I think he is, which was a great player for Oregon in 2022, was the Ducks' second best receiver behind Troy Franklin that year. I mean, Chris Hudson was also pretty good that season, but I see Cota. I think this is a possession receiver who does have an explosive element, but the physicality, taking contact, blocking well, I see Chase Cota here in Jeremiah McClellan, and that's what I think Oregon has. Now, with him on the timeline, I think it's tough for him to crack the depth chart this year. He's often described as a really high floor guy, and he's really ready to contribute right away. I don't see that on Oregon's depth chart, which is not a bad thing. I mean, Jurion Dickey, granted he was injured for a good portion of last season, But I don't even know if Dickey is going to be near the top of the 2 deep this year. He'd maybe be able to push out Gary Bryant or Trayshawn Holden, but he was as high a floor with a high ceiling recruit as we've seen at the wide receiver position, at least since I've been covering the Ducks here on the show. So I think it's tough for him to crack the depth chart this year. He'd have to beat out either Jurion Dickey or Kyler Casper, which would be not impossible per se, but they do have 1 or 2 years of experience ahead of him in a college weight room, in a college nutrition and speed program and everything like that. I think 2025 is when he can become a player because Oregon will lose Tez Johnson, Gary Bryant Jr., Trayshawn Holden, and Evan Stewart, potentially. You could lose your top 4 receivers. McClellan's someone that Oregon would definitely like to keep around because you want to have that possession receiver, and I think that that's kind of what he brings to the table. Conversely, Gatlin Bair brings a different sort of skill set to Oregon. So Gatlin Bair was the last major recruit for the Ducks. He signed on the second National Signing Day a couple days ago on February 7th. He's 6'1", 194 pounds from Burley, Idaho. Not quite as high level of competition as McClellan, but it's not like McClellan was playing in Texas, Florida, or California there. Still, Idaho is, not producing a bunch of high-level recruits. But this is the second year in a row that Oregon is getting a 4-star pass catcher from the state of Idaho, Kenyon Sadiq being the other one. So there are clearly players to be had out there, as is the case in every state. It's just a matter of how many are out there. And anyway, Michigan wanted him the most. Oregon gets him after Jim Harbaugh says, I won the national championship. I'm going to the NFL. He's coaching our boy Justin Herbert, and we're big Jim Harbaugh fans now, I presume. On his film, the first thing that stands out with him is explosive speed. He runs a 10.15 in the 100-meter dash, which is, that's bonkers. That's just absolute insanity. That means once he hits his top speed, he's basically running 10 meters in 1 second. It's just, he's got a fantastic first step. He is absolutely someone that takes the top off the defense. I think his biggest improvement point is the contested catches. He doesn't show a lot in the blocking department on film, but he hasn't had to make, at least in his huddle highlights, a lot of contested catches because he's able to just run away from everybody in Idaho. Well, you're not going to be able to do that in the same way while at Oregon, so I think that's the area where he can improve the most. But when I look at him, I see Troy Franklin. I see a guy who is just so fluid, explosive. The size is similar. He can beat you down the field, big play potential, will run routes closer to the line of scrimmage, but is really at his best. Like when you think Troy Franklin, what are his biggest plays? Deep comebacks, deep post, go routes, and ins, right? Dig routes. I think that's what Gatlin Bair will be. The difference, of course, from Jeremiah McClellan is he's got a 2026 arrival time because of a 2-year LDS mission, so Oregon will have to wait, but that receiver room is going to have a lot of turnover for 2025, and we'll see what kind of young core they have or what transfers they bring in as they look to 2026. It's fun to think about right now because there aren't too many other things to think about on the football front. Which other receivers will be there for the Ducks? Because in this class, you've got Dylan Gresham, you've got Gatlin Bair, Jeremiah McClellan, you've got Jack Ressler as well, the 3-star from Mater Dei, Ryan Pelham, the flip from USC. Will Jurion Dickey still be there? Will Kyler Casper still be there? In the 2025 class, you've got Dallas Wilson and Adrian Wilson, no relation that I'm aware of there. I wonder how that all looks. That's still, a ways away, but I think between those two, they are distinctly different guys. I see McClellan doing most of his work 12 yards and in towards the line of scrimmage. I think Bair will do his best work 15 yards and beyond the line of scrimmage, much like Troy Franklin, which is not to say that either guy is limited to that, but I think the comps are a good way to think about this. Gatlin Bair, you think of him, think Troy Franklin. You think Jeremiah McClellan, you think Chase Cota. How often did Oregon go down the field to Chase Cota? Not very often. How often did they throw inside slants to Troy Franklin? Sometimes. But when was he at his best? When he's pushing the ball down the field. So, great question, though, from Taylor there. And if you got questions about this recruit versus that recruit, by all means, let me know, and I'll get into it. This question from Balin. Hey, couple of questions for Locked On Ducks. I answered one on a previous show. First, in addition to the Autzen expansion talk from the other day, what I have seen many people bring up is the side of the stadium opposite the awning has terrible concessions and amenities, like not enough bathrooms. The general feel is, while you're at it renovating that side, might as well add another 6,000 seats to bring the official capacity up to 60,000 and add an awning to that side too for the comfort of the fans and the added benefit of, hopefully, making the stadium louder again. What say you? I think when Oregon is good, which they have been under Dan Lanning, will continue to be under Dan Lanning, Austin's not going to have a problem being plenty loud. There have been games, there was a string of consecutive sellouts at Autzen Stadium that I believe was broken within the last several years. I don't know which game that was or what exactly caused that, but I would hold off on the expansion and more seats. I mean, I've not heard from anybody that's a fan or that I know that if you want to go see an Oregon football game, you're going to have an issue getting a ticket. If that were the case, okay, I'd be open to it. But I don't think you need to expand because the attendance is still very, very good at Oregon. USC was one of the largest crowds in the stadium's history, but it's not an automatic sellout the way that it used to be. Usually is, but not all the time. I just don't think adding another 6,000 seats, do you think for every Oregon football game there's 6,000 more people that would want to go? Maybe. Maybe. But with the advent of television and mass media, it's a lot easier for people and a lot more affordable, of course, to enjoy Oregon football via their couch. So I think the size of the stadium is perfectly fine. As for upgrading the amenities, these are the things that I am on board with. I don't see the stadium renovation. It's not Research Stadium, right? Which needed to be expanded, which needed to be grown. And then in a dumb and somewhat, unfortunately, ironic move, Oregon State gets de facto relegated to the Mountain West, which doesn't feel great. Does not feel great. And that's the other reason I feel for them. They're making all the investments to be the best they can be, to bring themselves up to where everybody else was, at least closer to it. And then they just get demoted for dumb, stupid, no good, very bad reasons. But anyway, I digress. At Autzen, I haven't been there, honestly, in 7 years. 7 years is the last time I went to Autzen Stadium. I've been to Matthew Knight Arena more recently, but I was there for work. I've not been to Autzen in a while. I'm trying to go to a game this year. I actually have that as a to-do list. There's a reminder on my phone, literally, to say, look at how this schedule could work and everything, because there's a broadcast I got to work around and, yada, yada, yada. So I think that for Autzen, if you're talking about making concessions better, if you're thinking about, adding Wi-Fi so people's phones work, if you're talking about making suites better, adding an awning, maybe, all of that stuff is fine. I just think on the expansion front, I don't know what exactly that's bringing to the table other than more room for opposing fans in the Big Ten, who oftentimes travel very well. There are a lot of big-time fan bases in the Big Ten that travel very well. I don't want them to have an easy time coming to our stadium and getting tickets, and I want them to, be able to go to the game, of course, but we don't want to allow for, maybe a few hundred or thousand more fans of the other team to get in there. I just wonder if there are 6,000 Oregon fans that can't go to a game that would then go to a game if the stadium were expanded. I don't know. I don't have those numbers. I'm not a marketing or a ticketing person there, but I trust Oregon to do what's in their best interests. And I think the tailgate scene can be upgraded. I think that if you're saying the concessions can be better from what I remember, that's certainly true. Those elements, I'm on board. Good sorts of renovations. But expanding the capacity just to expand the capacity? No, I don't think that needs to happen. All right, let's close as we often do with men's basketball here. So, who watched the game? Oh, man. Who watched the game last night? I mean, what a mess. Oregon won, just to be clear. 85-80 over Washington. 2-0 against the Huskies in all sports in 2024. Woohoo! It's a new era. Man. Oregon was up 20 points. I'm not kidding. With 10:25 to go. With just under 4 minutes to play, it was a 1-point game. They went almost 7 minutes without a field goal. Without a field goal. And then Washington got hot. And so I'm glad Oregon got the win. They're 8-4 in Pac-12 play, 16-7 overall. They're not currently on the bubble, but if they beat Washington State on Saturday, by the way, if you're in Eugene, go to that game. That needs to be an awesome crowd, needs to be rocking. Washington State is really good. They're playing really good basketball. Washington State is a last four in team for the Ducks, so it's a rare quad one opportunity in the Pac-12, and at home, you got to have this game. I'm trying to think if it is overstating things to say that Oregon's at-large hopes rest on this game. It might be slightly, but then you would have to win 2 of the 3 games between Utah, Colorado, and Arizona later this year, and Arizona's on the road. So between this game and those final 3 games, Oregon needs 2 wins. 3 of the games are at home. They beat Washington State just barely up in Pullman. The Cougars are playing really good basketball. They're a last 4 in sort of team, according to Joe Lenardi on Bracketology. Oregon can still build an at-large berth. If they only lose 2 games the rest of the way and they pick up some quality wins, they'd be in that 22-9 sort of range. I have a hard time seeing that sort of team, especially if they were to maybe win a game or 2 in the Pac-12 tournament, getting left out as an at-large. Here's my concern. The highs for this team, when they play well, they look like a tournament team, but they just feel like they're missing an it factor, and I don't know what it is. Because Kuznard, who was incredible, again, he's just been killing Washington this year, had 27 points. He is the alpha and the leader on this Oregon team. That's something they were missing last year. He stepped into that role. There's just something about him. Like, you're good enough to build a 20-point lead, but then lose it in not 9 minutes, not 10. They lost that lead, and it was down to 1 in about 7 minutes of action. 6-7 minutes. That doesn't instill me with a lot of confidence. I will feel better if Oregon wins this game against Washington State, but it's going to be very, very hard to do so. So if you're in Eugene thinking about going, get a ticket and go. They're not that expensive, and Oregon needs the fan support because Washington State is a big opportunity, and Oregon's about to play 3 straight games on the road. Cal is playing much better basketball, which I thought they would under Mark Madsen. Stanford always gives Oregon fits, especially in the Bay Area. And then Oregon State, rivalry game. So 3 straight on the road upcoming for the Ducks. I mean, it's a huge game. It's where Oregon's at. But the bubble hopes are not done for Oregon. But this game against Washington State's really big. I'll be honest, I'm not feeling very confident. I am not feeling very confident going into the Washington State game. I hope I'm wrong. Appreciate everyone listening. Thanks for being patient. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, go Ducks.